So hi everyone, I'm Jeannie Ralston. I'm the co-founder of Next Tribe, and we have such a great event tonight. We have Annabelle Gurwitch, one of my favorite writers, with us, and we've been doing a little chatting here with some of our Next Tribe members who get all members come in early if they want. So Annabelle, welcome. I've known you for a while now because you volunteered to be at our first event in New York City, and it was such an honor, and you blew us away with your talk then. I remember being like, oh my God, she is everything I expected. So welcome, and if people don't know Annabelle, which probably everyone does, but if they're here, but she's the author of I See You Made an Effort, which was a New York Times bestseller and a Thurber Prize finalist. She has many other books. You say tomato, I say shut up. And wherever you go, there they are. She's been written for everyone, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New Yorker, and Next Tribe. I'm gonna put Next Tribe in there too. And she's been a contributor to NPR, and she was the host of Dinner and a Movie, which I used to watch, and I loved it then. So we're just thrilled to have her here with us. Annabelle, I could just go on and on, but welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Jeannie, when I met you, and I'm just trying to see here what page your thank you was on. It's in
Oh, I
the
know. I saw that, and I was so touched. Thank you so much, because yes, you did write some beautiful pieces for us, and I was so honored to see that. Thank you.
Well, I did. I always thank Next Tribe in my books now because, when I met you and the Next Tribe was sort of in its nascent stages. I've been to Next Tribe events now all over the country. It was just like, oh yes, my tribe. That's why, I love the name. But I just love the mandate. And what's funny is that as many of us as there are, the outlets, and this is also a product of what's happened in the world and in COVID, a lot of magazines have shut down, and a lot of sort of places that collect, that are areas for people to collect in, and like for us looking for community, some of those things have disappeared. And I think during this time, groups like this have become even more important because we know where our people are and where to find, the aggregate of like, what do you read or what are you watching? Because there are cultural touchstones for us. And I think that's really fantastic to have all of us are resources for each other.
And
That's what's really great about this group. And that's why I give a thank you because, also, one of the first stories I published with Next Tribe, it gave an idea for a story that's in this book. I published a piece with you guys about the sad graveyard of sex toys in my sock drawer.
yes.
And I made myself, even made myself blush when I was writing it, and I just loved that I could write, somewhere about that. And in this book, I write about, I give the expanded story.
Yes. Well, I wondered. I was looking to see if that was going to be in there, but we're just happy to have had it. And I want us to say about this book. So I was telling Annabelle this before. I always put Post-it notes on things I read. Like when I read something that's just like killer line or great idea, just all that. And so you can see that I was busy. I would put more, but I ran out of Post-it notes. So anyway, one thing I want to say about this book, I've seen a lot of books tackle the idea of aging, when they do it in a funny way, clever, whatever. But what really struck me is how you're doing aging, but putting on top of that idea of downward mobility, of like, oh my gosh, it's not as it is in those Northwest Mutual ads or something where, oh, your retirement, yes, here you can do this and you can change your mind and go buy an apartment and this and this. That there's something amiss. There's this idea we had for this age is not really happening, is it? For a lot of us.
Right. I think part of this book started, there were a number of sort of inciting incidents um, and inspirations for how this book started. I mean, I'm always writing, but there was a conversation I had with my friend, the actress Marissa Tomei. In the book, I don't use her name, but she's given me permission to say this, but the whole title of the introduction of I Thought There'd Be Coasting, we were talking about how everyone our age is working so hard. Everyone has 7 jobs. Our lives are different than we expected. And for some reason, we had internalized the sort of theme of those Nancy Meyers movies of we're going to be in the house with the overstuffed couch and the paint. There's never nary a chip in the paint, and like in one of those movies, and something's got to give. You know, she's got both Jack Nicholson and Keanu Reeves vying for her attention. Like that happens every day, and she also happens to have a pied a terre in New York, and she's got her house on the Hamptons on the beach, and I mean her hair is so perfect that it's like she's got a hairstylist stashed away 24/7 in one of the many bedrooms of her beveled house. Now that just is not happening. Now, not that that's necessarily the best outcome, and that's really what I wanted to write to, was this thing about this idea of like, we thought there'd be coasting and there's not coasting, but what is there? And can that be a story that even though the expectations aren't what we expected, can that story, I don't want to say have a happy ending, but can there be a redemptive value in it? Because I mean, let's face it, I don't want to live a life, and so that means I don't want to write about a life, because writing is, I process things through writing, and I develop sort of a life mission and an ethos through my writing and examination, right? So when I realized, okay, so there's no coasting, so what is there? And is there a way that I can love the life I'm leading? You know, so I was a little worried when I wrote the title Downward Mobility, and I put the word adventures because I wanted to write to this idea that it wasn't all negative. I mean, and not the idea that financial insecurity or economic fragility is a good thing. Nobody would want that. But how do we, how do we live with that? How do we adapt to our lives, and what are the saving graces, and what are the strategies we make, and how do we live this life and be joyful and despite whatever's happening? And that's what I'm really interested in, and that's what I hope the book tackles. And it was a little bit of a taboo idea to wrap things in around the economic fragility idea and the downward mobility. I had a number of publishers who were interested in the material and interested in the book, but didn't like that angle. And I just felt I had to stick with it. I felt like there's such a sort of taboo about acknowledging that, about, wait a minute, where is my life? What is my life? And particularly for women. And I wanted to just throw that off. And that's again something also I'm really interested in, and I would love to hear from you guys. Just by the way, just to throw it out there too, to say I'd love to hear if I've tackled subjects that were taboo. I mean, that to me is what I always feel like is potentially my sweet spot in the writing, and what I hope to give to readers.
Yes, I should say that. So everybody, if you have questions or comments, you can put it in the chat, and then at one point we'll open it up for questions, and I'll just call on you to unmute yourself so you can talk to Annabelle directly. So please use the chat to kind of get your comments and questions in. But that's what I was going to ask you, because you obviously, we talked about that. You've written about sex before, very openly, and you even blushed, which I can't imagine you blushing, to be honest. But
I trust myself with the things that I write, and then I think, what was I thinking publishing the fact that I just wrote in this book that I turned my vagina into a black holes circling the universe of like the pulsating energy matter. Like, I'm like, what am I crazy? What was I thinking? I don't
But is it more than, is it harder to write more or blush worthy to write about money? I feel like that people are
Oh, Jeannie, thank you so much because, honestly, I feel like that is so much more uh, upsetting to me to and revealing that I would write that I worry about my financial future. And there was a scene in this book that I was really concerned was revealing about my own vulnerability as a person and as a woman and also as a public person, right? So, in this chapter, which is called The Blank That Will Change Everything, that just is embarrassing to me, that the way that I can be seduced by advertising and how I fell in love with a poof, a pillow, and then went on a mission to like find a cheaper version of it. I probably spent as much money as if I had just bought the damn thing to begin with. I bought like 17 other less expensive cheap pillows but the whole idea of like, why do I think this pillow, this poof in my living room is going to save my life? Where did I internalize this idea that that's going to do it for me? And it's embarrassing to me to admit that I, who would publicly, talk about the messages inherent in advertising and how women are targeted, and then also at the same time lust after a pillow. But then I'm writing in that chapter about a day when my dryer broke, and I don't want to spend the money to call a repair person, and I take out a bread knife and I wrap paper towels around it and I stick it in there, and then the knife drops out of my hand and it goes into the house thing, and I know I'm so fucked. And then I have to call the repair person, and he can't do it, and then she can't do it, and then I end up having to buy a new dryer. And it's always when you feel like you've just gotten a handle on your finances, going well, and then this thing happens, and trying to save a little bit of money, you're fucked. And I that's not the person that I think of myself as presenting to the world. And that's that's more personal than writing about my search for the perfect lube. For
right.
some reason, I feel like that has more shame in that. And so when I write my books, I always ask people to read stories for me in advance, and I sent it to someone who's very successful, or or has that appearance, or what does that even mean? I mean, really, what does that mean? But it's someone I didn't expect to say, "Oh, who hasn't stuck a knife into an appliance, tried to fix it?" And I thought, okay, all right, okay, and then I find out that my best friend, who is a teacher in a public school system here in Los Angeles, during COVID, her dryer broke. She's a 25-year veteran teacher. She owns a house, but things are still expensive for her, even though she's got a certain amount of privilege and she will have a pension, but she couldn't afford to replace her dryer. And she told me, she said, "I'm line drying my clothes till I can afford a dryer." And she thought, I've never told anyone that. And I thought, we need to throw off that. What is that?
Yeah.
Who's living the Instagrammable life? So, I've just thrown open this is why I like to do an event like this in my office. This is not the way my bookshelves are supposed to look. And just, by the way, I don't know who's going to relate to this, but here's, I'm not a Marie Kondo person. I feel one of the things I want to challenge people with in this book is to say, when I hold something close to me, is joy the measure of something that has value? Well, I keep this on my desk. This is the Mother's Day card that I wrote to my mom when I was about 6, that I inherited when she died 2 years ago. And it's a few years ago now, but I write about that in the book. And it is not joy. It is not joy that I feel when I hold this close. It's memories, it's connection, it's love. And so I challenge you, Marie Kondo, to please come fix my office. But I also think that, let's remember this woman was like 20 something when she wrote that book. Maybe that's not the book for us.
Yeah.
So
Well, I do, and I do think what you're saying about being so hard to talk about this, but so many people need to know that we all kind of struggle. No, I mean, so it seems like it's almost gotten worse, the pressure on us to seem successful because of social media. But at the same time, the economics for a lot of us, to really be honest, are dropping off. I mean, a lot of people, especially in the creative field. So there's
yes.
like all this pressure. And so it's so refreshing to have somebody like you say, oh my God, I'm struggling too. And it's no shame in it that I mean, you have had, and you still have a big career and make money, but now being acknowledging it's different, and it's okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the things. I mean, and thank you for pointing this out, because this is why I wrote this book. To create a community around this. And I was just thinking about how what do we have instead. And what we have instead, and the last chapter of this book is about making community in the most unlikely places. And I don't know what other people felt, that yes, I love what we have instead. What we have instead is a deep commitment to each other and to community and to kindness. I feel like this is, as much as fracturing as COVID has been, there's been a recognition of the need for kindness. And there's been like a polarization of like, oh, rabble rousing, and then kindness on the other side. And so the last chapter in this book takes us into COVID, and I write about this coping that I was doing during COVID and creating a community online, and about my worst fears. My worst fear in life, since I can remember, was becoming Blanche Dubois. Alone, older, beauty fading, finances in disarray, with the paper lantern,
Yeah.
She's taken away to the loony bin, and she's the worst thing is she's lost in this illusion of self, because she can't see who she is. And also the idea that, depending on the kindness of strangers, this is what Tennessee Williams wrote about. Not that he felt this way, but he was illuminating this idea as this was the worst thing that could happen, particularly not an accident, to a woman of a certain age.
Right.
And I feel like I have faced that down. I am facing that down. And I prefer I was going to say I prefer the bright light. I prefer the ring light.
Okay.
I prefer the ring light. I don't actually have a ring light on today, but I do prefer a ring light. But I also, I think we can move beyond that. I like to think, it's funny. I was just hearing an author talk about how she publishes on her blog scenes that didn't make it in her books. And I am that author who writes I write at least 2 or 3 books that don't get published in and I was thinking maybe I should start doing that because I worked for years on a couple of stories that didn't make it into this book, and one was alternate endings for Blanche Dubois.
Oh,
And
I would love that.
I had this like scene where she's like goes to this place now that's like the equivalent of the loony bin was then. It's like a Betty Ford place, and she meets someone and she like writes to Stella, run while you can, Stanley's an asshole, get out of there honey, I'm doing so much better, I met a guy, turns out I'm not crazy, and I just
Oh, this would be great. I'm going to talk to you later. I should, unless it's already been published, but I would.
it
Oh
hasn't.
my God, that is fabulous. And you know what is interesting to me that you talked about how you used your house. I mean, that's one of the things you started using, bringing, making part of your income was through your house.
Yes.
And I was thinking of it as your house is working for you and you can't be working or something, but you also make a reference to the women of old who would run, the older women who'd run their boarding houses, and are we coming back to that or something? I just thought that was so
Well,
interesting.
and what if we are? That's the question. The question I'm at, and what if we are? So here's a story that didn't make it in the book. Another one of my stories that got disenfranchised, and it's so hard as a writer. There's always a lot of examples. At least this is the way I work. That tell the same point that I have to decide from. Right. So when I was writing about becoming a landlady, taking in boarders, again confronting my worst fear. Oh my God, am I that landlady from the 1940s, post-depression cigarette with I remember my grandmother would sometimes have her stockings rolled down to her ankles. It was like just like I had this horrible blousy house dress, slippers, the whole thing. um and the thing is, that's not a terrible tradition. and what I feared was going to be a terrible thing. What I, of course, found out was that the majority of people renting out rooms in their homes are women. We are actually leading the way in house sharing, and maybe, of course, there was Golden Girls, but maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe it's the ideal thing. Why do we? Why did it get a bad name? What are we all doing alone in our houses when we could? I mean, there's a lot of different reasons for living in different ways, but to even just say, is this the way we want to live? Humans always lived communally. It's only in the recent generations that we didn't. And are we better for it? And so to ask those questions, and then the actual real life experience I've had is I love having people stay at my house. Yes, it's been extra income for me, but it's really fun when your house empties of your children and maybe your spouse as well. Everyone's got a different configuration. I love the life that having people rent a room in my house when it's the right person. There is one story about my French tenant, perhaps, peut-être not the right person. Je ne regrette tout. I regret it all with that one. But it's added so much to my life. It's funny. There's someone who my child grew up with who comes and stays with me when she comes back into town. Her parents moved away, her 2 dads moved away, and she just during COVID framed some pictures she had shown me once when she was staying at my house that she took in Joshua Tree in the desert. And during COVID, she came and visited. We did a street visit in our mass, and she brought me these pictures that she had framed for me because she knew I loved them. And I'm one of her LA moms, and I just think there's so many interesting and creative ways that we can channel our energy, make community, and make our lives full of love and meaning without having to purchase as I put on Twitter today, the Louis Vuitton handbag. There's not a handbag that's going to make change everything in your life. But the story, wait, I think about the story that I didn't put in, and it's a good one. Oh gosh, when it was in the 90s, the 1990s, that I was commuting back and forth to New York from LA to do roles in movies. And these were independent movies that weren't paying a lot of money. So I really couldn't afford, and they weren't putting me up in hotels. So, oh, good to see you too, Barbara. Thanks for coming. So I heard about someone who was supposedly a patron of the arts, and she was renting out rooms in her apartment that you could stay if you were working in the arts. So it was sort of a circle of friends, you know. And I heard she just loved supporting artists. Well, that person was Mary Beth Yarrow. She was married to Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Oh,
And I did this for 2 or 3 years. I would come and stay in Mary Beth's apartment in an extra bedroom, and there were other people. Marsha Cross, the actress who later was on Desperate Housewives, and she's a fantastic actress and also advocate for cancer and great causes. Marsha would stay there, and there were other filmmakers, and it was kind of this amazing thing. So at the time, I assumed Mary Beth Yarrow, and it was staying in the Peter, Paul, and Mary apartment, the one that with all the guitars and the pianos and the couches that I would imagine that they sat on when they wrote these songs. It meant so much in my life, and it was like $50 a night or something, and you'd leave it in cash. And I assumed at the time that Mary Beth was doing that. First of all, she's a great lady and a Buddhist and wonderful person because she loved the arts and wanted to support artists, and she was doing that for that reason. It never occurred to me that she also might need the money.
hmm.
And that idea that someone who had lived and was part of history and of musical history of our humanity, of this important music and this art, would have any financial need, it never occurred to me. And it was very humbling to realize that that was also a motivation. And
Right.
so when I set out to do this and I had this experience, and it was as rewarding, you know, I had Mary Beth in my mind, and I held her sort of close as a role model for me of what I could be doing, the exchange of, you know, helping someone stay at my house and how they would be helping me, and how I could create this little artistic world. And it really was successful for me. It's been a really successful thing. But so when I decided to write about it, I wanted to write also about the financial need, because that was something that had never been spoken to me about. And I wanted to acknowledge that. So in case other women were doing it, maybe they wouldn't have to feel any sort of shame about it. You know, I didn't end up including that story because it just so happens that I had heard about another story of a woman who had done that coincidentally up the street from me, where famous people like George Clooney had stayed and Paula Poundstone. And so I had to choose that story or the story with Mary Beth. And God, this is the kind of thing that I will spend months on, and I'll write drafts, and I'll have both stories, but then I'll ask my readers to vote which story. I mean, this is where writing gets, it's so crazy to be a writer. It doesn't make any sense that I'm spending my time asking people to read and then vote on which story is better. But the story that ended up in the book, I hate to say it, but it ended up in the book because of a murder that took place.
Like
And
cautionary tale.
cautionary tale, but I went for that because it set up the stakes
Yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah.
you know, what could happen. Story of Mary Beth Yarrow, because she did such a great service for me, but also it helped her, and just this connection of Peter, Paul, and Mary. I mean, it's so cool. So I don't know. Did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing? What did I do? What do you think? Did I make the right choice?
Yeah, I think so. People can vote or in the chat or raise your hand. Well, I mean, I think some people are probably haven't gotten that. We don't want to have any spoilers, but anyway. Well,
You'll have to. Oh, I'm sorry. You'll have to. Well, the spoiler alert is that I lived. I didn't get murdered. So, woo!
But
Write me if you missed that other story. Please let me know, because I just, this is the kind of thing that vexes.
I think you did the right. I think you're right about raising the stakes, especially because of the way your first the young people who are experiencing homelessness. I'm saying it right? But especially when they come in and you understand that. And I really do love how you did, like you say, you created your own community. And I have to ask, I mean, what happened during COVID? Were you able to have some people with you during COVID, or that part?
Oh, that's funny. I haven't written about this yet. I had a little pod at the very beginning. This is one thing I'm hoping to write about, which is the importance, I think, of having friends of different ages.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we create community is we seek out friends who have similar experiences, but I also have a writing collective. We're all different ages, and so I have good friends who are writers who were suddenly at home and with their 4-year-old daughter in a 1-bedroom, and we became a pod at the very beginning of the pandemic, and they were renting out the little bedroom to work in alternately. It's a couple, and then bringing their daughter to play in the backyard. And so that was a great way that I could make my house useful, because my tenant immediately fled, because she was a student from Brazil. But then then my child came back from college, boomeranged home, which I write about in the book, the idea of children boomeranging. I mean, a lot of people have their adult children at home, but then after if you've read the New York Times piece or been following any of the media, I was diagnosed with lung cancer during COVID. And then my child has since then moved out, because they were really concerned about bringing the virus home to our house once that happened. So it has been a very dramatic time for me. I'm doing really well, but I am one of those solo at home people. And I think, that's coming to the end right now. I'm, a few weeks away from being fully vaccinated. And, but it has been, I've had a lot of meals alone, like many of us. It has been a real test of, and people have, I mean, we're all finding our different ways, right? Through Zoom, through outdoor meetups, through phone calls. I mean, we've all stretched our coping skills through. Right. For a little while I was doing a once a day cry scheduled. I cry on Tuesdays from 9 to 10 a.m. I also cry on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 9 to 10 a.m. But I mean, it's been really a test, and then having a book come out at this time and not getting to be with people, which is sort of like the fun part of writing.
Yes, exactly. After all that. Hey, I want to open it up. Amy Rogers, does somebody have their thing? Amy, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, thanks. I'm fascinated because a few years ago I got foreclosed and no one wanted to hear about it until I decided to make it funny. And I realized that the most reliable man in my life was the foreclosure guy from Wells Fargo, because he called me every Thursday, no matter how mean I was to him the week before. And I people can hear that story now. And it became a little essay. But my question to you is, you are so brilliant at using humor to take the harsh edges off of all the hurt. Does it come naturally, or do you have to really work at it still?
Oh, that's such a good question. And that is a question I get often because this is my life of how I live and how I write about things. You know, I don't know that it came naturally to me when I was younger, but this is the way I have turned my brain has changed and so in some sense it does come naturally in the sense that um as I live my life, I'm always thinking about what makes a good story, you know, and the funny thing is just thinking about what makes a good story gives me a kind of detachment that allows me to see humor in things. And I'm going to answer. I can't. I'm not looking at the chat,
Oh,
but
I am.
I'm going to open it up to the chat so I can see it. But I do want to address. I think Kim asked me a question, but I want to before I get to that. So, it is this funny thing. So, because I'm always thinking about stories, when things happen in my life, I do go pretty quickly to like the funny because it's like a instant sort of coping mechanism that I've developed by thinking about stories. So, for instance, I mean, there's nothing funny about a lot of the things I'm writing about. It's how we deal with them and where our expectations meet the road, where the rubber meets the road. So one thing that happened during COVID was, my car was repossessed.
Oh my God.
I lost track of things because of the cancer and the and the guy came to my front door without a mask on. And I was terrified. At the same time, there was this kind of funny moment where I was in absolute terror when I said, "Why don't you have a mask on?" And he said, "Do you see my shirt?" I'm about to write this in a story, just by the way. "Do you see my shirt? What does it say?" I said, "It says veteran." And he said, "I'm a veteran. I don't need to wear a mask." And I said, "Can't anybody buy a shirt that says a t-shirt that says veteran on it?" It turns out repo men do not like a joke. So, but I mean, as terrible as it was, I'm thinking, this is a crazy story. Did he just say to me his t-shirt that says veteran on it has inoculated him from COVID? I mean, that's nuts, right? So I'm always thinking that of these crazy things. When I got diagnosed with lung cancer, I thought I didn't even get to earn it. Why didn't I smoke? I was, I write about dating someone. The first person I was dating, he was actually a big weed smoker, and kept saying to him like I no, I'm not gonna. I don't want to get lung cancer, so I didn't smoke all that weed. Maybe I should have. I didn't know I had it already. This was like probably I've had this for 5 years. It was undiagnosed. I could have smoked that weed. It really had nothing to do with it. Has to do with other kinds of cell stuff. So I missed out on some. I'm not a big weed smoker anyway, but just the funny thought of like,
Yeah.
oh, what was I missing out on that party for? So somehow or another, and it's not a bad exercise. I think I might have said this, I'm not sure, in the writing workshops I've done with Next Tribers. Sometimes, if I'm also, now let me just say, I have depression, anxiety. I mean, it's not like my life is a laugh riot, I mean, like that's, but my writing tools help me emotionally. When I sometimes when I get into a terrible spot, which can happen every other day, if I do a writing exercise, which is I change my pronouns when I'm talking about myself to she did this or that, she's facing this or that, and I can think about some detachment, or I think about myself as a character in that I'm writing, it helps me to not be as emotionally overwrought. And that can be really redemptive when you're facing tough subjects, is my experience. So I don't know if that's a really long answer to that question, but is people always wonder about, I think people who write comedy do so because first thought is not comedy. So
Mm.
maybe it's the second thought, but it's the thought that becomes a regular way of coping. And it's it has I recommend comedy writing as a form of therapy. It's not a bad idea. I just want to say, for people who've asked me about the lung cancer, I'm really lucky. I am able to take this very super high tech gene targeted medication that is keeping me able to have a pretty normal life right now. I'm really lucky, and we have to all fund more research because early detection is the key. For some reason, there's a big epidemic of lung cancer in women, non-smoking women, and I'm trying to get the
Really?
message out.
Wow. Then we need to do a story about that. That's interesting. Definitely look at. Yeah, people have
We
been
do.
writing, asking about that in the comment. And I know. Let's see. Lucy you have a question, Lucy, about this book or about the.
Just saying that I saw that you had sold TV rights to the book, which I was excited about, and I was wondering if there are any updates on that, or I know it's early yet.
Well, I'm developing the idea with HBO, and Bill Maher is the producer, along with two other great producers who've produced some really thoughtful movies about women in particular. And this one of the movies they produce is Nocturnal Animals, also a recent film called I'm Thinking of Ending Things. And it focuses around the story of taking in boarders and housing the young people who were experiencing homelessness. And we just got my go ahead to write the script based on my scene breakdown, which is this board in my office right here. My little
Wow. Oh,
my
cool.
card. So I'm definitely a note card. Charlie Kaufman. Yes, Thinking of Ending Things. Such an interesting film about perspective and whether what you're seeing, is it turns out is uh, not the actual experience of life, but an idea. And that's a really interesting thought. Also, when you think about a point of view in memoir, is people ask me sometimes, is everything true that you write? It's true the way I experienced it. So it's debatable, I guess.
You have a great chapter. It's told in the format of emails, and it's
Oh,
and we actually ran a story once, sort of similar to that, like this fantasy, retirement fantasy, or how you live out your day. This great. So I want to ask, what is it? What is your fantasy for how you get older from here?
well, that's the thing. And I need you all to read this book and tell me what you think of this idea, because this chapter is the one, Dear Girlfriends. And this is a departure in the book. It's the only chapter that is just absolutely intended for humor. And it's satirical and not based on life itself, right? So it's my fantasy of what would happen, my fear, you could say, what would happen if all my girlfriends and we actually acted upon the idea of getting a row of tiny houses together and in some land with the intent to, like, live out our days there. And all the things that go wrong could possibly go wrong. And then it ends up, it's just going to be me and no girlfriends there. And of course, that's my fantasy, is that, we're gonna outlive the guys anyway, and to figure out how we all live together. But is it really gonna work? I don't know. So I hope people don't hate me for, like, making fun of the fantasy that I also have. You know what I mean? It's not like I don't actually want that, but I also see the ways it might not work. So, and I was actually thinking of making a short film about women who go off and set off to try to do that, and everything just goes wrong.
Yes.
So,
So
I don't want it to be a down.
No, the piece we did was like that you go and you're all together, and then you start thinking about how it really is going to work, and then you're going to be, whose job is it to unload the dishwasher, and then so it's true. It's
Right.
a good point, but maybe in the future there'll be a Next Tribe community. Maybe we'll expand that way.
Yes, I mean, there's so many ways it can go wrong, and yet it's such a great idea. If my neighbor, her mother died a couple years ago. She lived out her final days, actually a couple years, in a fabulous, but this is again, it was a super high end place that was just actually all women. It was like a Seven Sisters college place up in Connecticut. Oh. And so it was really like, it would be like all of us together, just like women who have similar values, or if we don't have similar values, we have really good arguments why our values are different, just like smart, all the people you want to be with. And then they would go intentional community, thank you. And they were like buses that would take them to the opera and theater in New York. It was just kind of really good food. It was all perfect. Of course, it was really expensive. Like, how are we going to get that on a budget? Oh gosh. So yeah.
Well, I wanted to say that one of my favorite things you said it at the first Next Tribe event, and it was a quote, the worst thing would be to peak early. Everything up to this moment is early peaking. And you also have it you mentioned in this book, which I was so happy about, because it's so perfect. And can you just explain a little bit, how you came up with that? Because there's a story behind it and how it applies to us.
Yes. Oh, I thank you so much. Well, Jeannie, this is why I love you. I feel like you see, I love that you light upon the things that I write about that are so important to me. So, the idea of like never peaking early was something that was my child inspired in me. So one of the things I write about in the book is that Ezra, my 23-year-old, uses pronouns they, them, theirs. So I'm going to use those pronouns right now if that gets confusing for anyone. We're all adapting to this language now, and that's partially one of the subjects I write about in the book. So I had the idea of just this phrase. I mean, I didn't come up with the phrase of never peaking early, but it really became like an anthem for me to repeat to myself the moment when Ezra was going off to college, and we were in the car driving up from New York City up to the campus, upstate New York, and Ezra said, Mom, I do you think I'm a failure? I said, what? You're a failure? You're not even in college yet, and the idea that they would think they were a failure because they hadn't achieved all the things that one kid in their high school seemed to have actually really did achieve. This kid was like discovered with this band and blah blah blah, and and on social media everybody can know about it. I mean, when we were growing up, there maybe would be some genius who would get a scholarship at 16 off to college or discover something or something great, but I mean, it wasn't in front of you 24 hours a day and on social media of how someone looks good and someone doesn't have pimples or someone gets a music contract or all these kinds of things that can happen, or the way people's lives look perfect. And Ezra was convinced that because they hadn't gotten, I don't know, notoriety in high school, that it was too late for them and that they were already a failure, and they were 17 years old. And I said, what? the worst thing that can happen is that you peak in high school. Don't, and I, when I said that, you said the worst thing that happens is to peak early. If the best thing that ever happened to you is what happened in high school, that's a disaster. And I thought about that, and I thought, I'm talking to myself, about even things that happened last year, like why do I have to place all this value? I mean, why do I do that? There's a lot of social contracts, a lot of social constructs that tell us that, or we see, books that are like 20 under 20, 30 under 30, I mean, like there's this idea of this measure that, oh, I mean, and yes, it's great that there are 30 great people under 30, but I think it becomes this drumbeat that we measure ourselves by when we haven't hit those marks, or maybe we've hit other marks, or maybe it just hasn't been recognized. Or what if we were even in 20 under 30, but now we're 40, and who are we? Or now we're 50. How do we not have all that stuff? Is marketing, and I think those messages become internalized. And even if we say it's marketing, oh my goodness, it can feel scarring even when we know it's not true. And so, yes, this idea of being a late bloomer, or yes, this idea of just like, why peak early? Like, if I have that in my mind that I haven't peaked yet, then I have a new anthem, which is also just I like his little catchphrases, stay curious. I want to stay curious about what my life is, what is meaningful to me. I want to return the meaning to myself. So I'm not the, likes or hearts or whatever. I mean, all those things. And look, all that being said, we all have to earn a living and we want to make an impact in the world, but I think we can undervalue ourselves based on this idea of when we have value. So I have to credit my child for reminding me that peaking early can mean, not having peaked yesterday. It doesn't necessarily just mean in college. It's,
Yes.
everything that happened the day
It keeps
before.
you looking forward. It keeps you looking forward, and
Yes.
still aiming for something meaningful and worthwhile. I wanted
Yes.
Brenda Blue had a question about, you were talking about gender pronouns. Brenda, if you want to unmute yourself and ask her directly, or if she's still here, sometimes people can't unmute themselves. Anyway, if she's not here, she was asking you about how was it a struggle for you to comprehend and to really understand the gender pronouns, and you can teach us a lesson, and I know your son has really been helpful in this for you. So
Yes, my child. One of the confusing things is that it's really hard to refer to an adult child when they're not a son or daughter. There really is no word for it. Offspring sounds so cold. That's okay. We're all learning, I just sometimes say the human who sprung from my uterus, whose cell phone bill I still pay. That doesn't roll off the tongue. This is clunky. This is not to be desired. But I do think that the young people often can see a future that we can't see anymore because it is their future. And I don't totally understand the world they want to inhabit, but I do really like the idea of, in theory, it sounds great. The idea of going beyond the societal expectations of gender. And I like the idea that when you first meet someone, there will come a time, perhaps, if we embrace this idea of gender being less important to be identified as, which is different from actual biological sex of a person, then perhaps we will have less expectations that come along with female and male, and I really appreciate that. I think the pronoun they, them, theirs can be confusing. It would not have been my choice. I wish they had picked In some countries, the pronouns used are they, ze. So I think that would have been easier because it doesn't have expectations to if they had adopted he, she, they, but they didn't. So I am completely supportive, and even though I don't understand it all, and I think what I'm writing to in the book is a journey of acceptance. I write about my confusion, and then yes, and other languages do have some languages have non-gendered singular pronouns. So, maybe we're just catching up to other ancient languages. But I do want to, I write about my own ambivalence about it because I think it's important to acknowledge. I just, didn't come out like, yes, like I'm a person like everyone struggling to understand these things.
We're about out of time. I'm hoping everyone, we got to a lot of questions, but you've mentioned a few things that you're doing, like the TV series you're working on.
Yeah.
What do you see forming in your mind for another book? Anything directly related to the COVID journey or to your cancer? Or I mean, do you think that we'll see anything about that?
Well, I am really interested. I'm now in, I'm interested in this experience that I'm having with a chronic illness and what that means. I'm still really interested in this idea of economic instability, and I think that's going to be with us for a while. I haven't gotten. I'm just really thinking about this book and adapting this book right now and other essays that I want to write right now, and my health, and I have a little bit less energy than I normally do, so I'm trying to balance work and taking care of myself. So I'm not doing the gazillion things I usually do.
Well, good.
I'm trying to focus and take care of myself and spread the word about my book. That's really important to
Yes.
me, but that's as far as I'm getting. But I am thinking, I think I have more books left in me, and I really want to have a chance to write them.
Absolutely. And we want you to come here and talk about, maybe next time we'll be in person. We can only hope that we'll be in person again, right? This is what
Yes.
we're aiming for. And as you guys know, I put out that 10 of you are going to win a free copy of her book. I just got them today or yesterday. So I was really excited, and they're great, beautiful. So I will be sending out an email with the video link to our event and with the 10 names. So I wish we had more than 10, but you want people to go out and buy one for friends, because it really is. I'd say I was thinking in my mind that you kind of anticipated in a way. I mean, a lot of us feel more economically fragile than we did a year ago. So, I mean, the book coming out now is even, it's prescient. And so
well, like I like to say, the funny thing is a lot of credit goes to Jennifer Caro, who came up with this book cover, which is so funny because, nothing says downwardly mobile more than a sofa on your lawn. Of course, now a sofa on your lawn is like what everybody wants. It's so funny that everything has changed. Of course, I like to say I can't afford this sofa that's on my book cover, but it is a funny thing that I think the world caught up with the timing for this book. I want to invite you to send copies to your friends, and I also, I love a book group. If it's more than one woman and a cat, I'm there. I say that as a woman with 2 cats, so I qualify for my own book club because I got 2 cats. So.
Well, and so if people want to get in touch about doing a book club thing, should they go through me, or is that how you'd like to do it?
You can go through Jeannie. You can also go to my website, and there's a little contact me.
Okay, very good. guys.
Contact me. And I wanted to say, thank you so much, Jeannie. Thank you all, tribe. If you feel also, Adventures by the Book. I love Susan at Adventures by the Book. Oh, I thought that was, yes, Susan. It's Susan Macbeth. Yes, she's fantastic. She's one of us. If you feel inspired to leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads, those things actually really help authors. There's like a crazy algorithm that helps when you get more reviews. It's nutty, but thank you.
No, and we will. And you guys be ready to I know everyone says laugh out loud, but seriously, there were moments like I had to keep rereading, like, oh my God, I love that so much. And and a lot of these lines are funny, even the 10th time I reread it. So that's a real the test there. So anyway, everyone, thank you. Please get her book and get your friends to get her book and get those reviews in. And I thank you all. Next Tribe. Remember, Next Tribe, we have a short story contest for all of you writers out there. And we're booking trips like crazy. We've got trips coming up in the fall. That's one of my specialties. So get ready to travel. Lucy Frost is going to be on. A few other people I've seen are on. Our Betsy Rosenberg. I think you're coming somewhere. Mary Glennon, yes. So anyway, good people and good fun. And thanks to all of you. And thanks, Annabelle, once again.
And thank you. Happy Passover. And to people who wrote me privately to say hello, like Kim, just thank you so much for being here, and just see you all.
Okay, great. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.